so tired, they told me.
Tired?
I know.
Oh my goodness. There's nothing like teacher tired. First week of school, first week of student teaching, yes, you will be tired. Probably the last week, you will still be tired. But hopefully you're getting some rewarding experiences along with that. So, we talked about task 1 during orientation. Any questions about task 1? You are very, very quiet. All right, then let's go to task. Yes? No?
Okay, I have a question.
Okay.
Can you scroll down whoever's touching that so I can like actually see it because I have it pulled up right now? But the wording on one of the narratives on task 2, task 1 confused me.
Okay.
Which one do you want? That's what I guessed.
Task 1 narrative. My hand is open. Anyways. Yeah, it says analyze and discuss how the community school how impact the planning, delivery, and assessment of your unit. I was confused about can we do that before we plan our unit?
Probably not.
Okay. 'Cause
Unless-
you had initially we couldn't do task our unit until we had task 1 done. And
Oh, no, I
I
never said
was
that.
confused.
No.
And
No. But you might be able to do two, you might be able to do parts of that because
Okay.
you have 3 different
Yeah.
questions pertaining to the 3 different things you're doing in contextual
Okay.
matters. Okay.
And then it says assessment of your unit. Is that talking about like assessing my unit or like the assessment in my unit?
The assessment in your unit.
Okay. I just want to make
Yeah.
sure the wording confused me.
No.
Dr. Lucas, can I throw something in about
Sure.
that? What I usually tell my students on A is they're thinking about how what they've learned will impact and how they're going to use that in their planning when they're doing writing before they're planning.
Right, that's what I was going to say. You can kind of think about how would these things impact what I'm going to do. Maybe it's not specifically what I'm going to do, but in general, how would low SES of the majority of my students impact my planning in my unit and all those kinds of things.
Okay. Thank you.
Kind of like what you have to keep in mind as you.
Right. Anything else? Okay, let's go to task 2 then. Now, at this point, none of you hopefully have taught your unit or started your unit. Hopefully you've thought about your unit, you have an idea of what your unit is going to be, whatever that is. But you are going to have to, before you can ever start teaching your unit, you have to give a pretest. So, when you write that pretest, a couple of suggestions you might want to keep in mind would be, as you write the questions, note the learning goal, which we're going to talk about here in just a second. Note the learning goal for each question. It will make it a whole lot easier when you go to analyze the data and when you have to fill in part of a chart on task 6. So, if you have 10 questions and you only have 3 learning goals, just mark on each question. You don't have to put it on the students' form if you don't want to, but you can. It won't mean anything to them, but it will really keep you organized and know what you need to do. Okay? So you know what you're going to teach, or you know what your unit, hopefully soon, you will know what that unit is going to relate to. And on task 2 is where you're looking for the standards and the learning goals. So you have to do a big idea. Now, our lesson plan format does not include big idea anymore, but the state teacher performance assessment does. So you're going to you're going to write a big idea. Remember, a big idea is not an objective. It is an overall theme, an overall statement about what you're going to teach. For instance, I shared with the elementary group a couple that I found. One was the concept was revolution, and the big idea was conflict leads to change. So it's not an objective. It is not the students will be able to. All right, that is not a big idea, but it's just an overarching concept or theme that you are teaching, okay, or that relates to what you're teaching. Once you have that, then you're going to look at the standards. the state standards that go with your lesson. And how many you pick just depends on what material you're covering. What we do say is that you have to have at least 3 learning goals. Now, they can be from one standard, they can be from several standards. You might have 20 learning goals. You probably don't want to do that, but you could. But maybe you have 3 standards, and from one standard you have 1 learning goal, from another standard you have 3 learning goals, and another you have 2. So you're going to have a total of 6 learning goals. But you have to have at least 3 learning goals, and we don't tell you how many standards you have to cover. Obviously, you have to cover at least 1. Okay? So you're going to look at the state standards, choose the standards that go along with what it is you're teaching as far as your unit goes. And keep in mind that the TPA is just about your unit. The other lessons that Mrs. Priest was telling you about, those aren't part of your unit. The TPA just is your unit. Bless you. Yes?
My cooperating teacher's school on their lesson plans requires them to have state and national standards. To adhere to that, do you want me to do both on my lesson plan, just put state in my TPA, or do you want me to include both?
Okay, if you look at the rubric on that particular section, you will see that that is one place where you are guaranteed a 4 if you include national standards.
Okay.
So if you only include the state standards, you're not going to get a 4. That's the easiest 4 in the TPA, and it specifically says that you have to have national and state.
Okay, thank you.
So when you look at your standards, the state standards, you're going to write the measurable goals, and those are, you're going to write the learning goals, and those are measurable. The student will be able to, okay, something that you can measure. So when you get to that point, remember at least 3. And this is in the template that you will be filling in. So the chart for task 2, you'll see you're going to put your big idea up here. On the standard, you're just going to copy and paste it, word for word, straight from the web page. Okay? Include the number so that we can look at it, but also include the verbiage. What does it, what is that standard? Because we will not know them, but we don't want to look them up. If you're, because the standards, a lot of them include a lot of stuff. If you're not going to cover everything in the standard, but the piece you're going to cover is in that standard, I would just highlight the part that you're going to cover and make a little note and say, I'm not covering it all, I'm just covering the highlighted parts. Then once you have your standards, then you're going to put your learning goals. Okay, the student will be able to, your measurable learning goals. So you'll have how many, okay? Those are the ones that you are going to include, obviously, on your pretest. So I would put a little note, you can even number them if you want, if you don't want to put, learning goal and write it all out. You can number them so that you know what questions cover what learning goals. It will be very important a little bit later. And then you also want to make sure that you include, whether you're using Bloom's or Murano or whoever, but you want to include the level, yes?
So do we have to have a traditional pre and post test, like so it's an actual, I can't do, because I'm English, so I
Okay.
didn't know if we could do like this.
Give me just a second and I'll talk about the pre and post. So you want to make sure that you include the level of each of your standards. I would make sure that you've got a good variety here. I mean, if you're all at the factual level, probably not a good thing. Okay, so you want to make sure that you have a good range of levels for your standards. For your learning goals. Yes?
I have a question about the standards, and I've been going to the Department of Education's website getting standards. I'm an art, so the memorandum at the front says the standards were just updated, I think, July 2018. My cooperating teacher uses Schoolology to do all this stuff, and the standards that he's using are totally different, and they're from 2007, but it's just the drop-down menu, and then he puts it in. And he's asking me if I can use those, and I'm like, I think I need to use the most updated state standards for the lesson. So for this and the lesson
you should be using the ones that are currently on the West Virginia Department of Education's homepage, the most current ones. So if he's using many-year-old ones, it sounds like those aren't even Common Core that far back. I would say those are probably the CSOs, which are Content Standards and Objectives. Yeah. Which you can blame us, but you can say that you will not pass if you use old standards.
Okay.
So if he wants you to use them in his class, what you might do is, I don't want you to start getting, I don't want you to use two sets, because when you start teaching, you'll be using the current ones. You're not going to be going back and using CSOs. So I guess for him, you could put the current one, and then if he wants you to find the old CSO, I guess you could do that and write it down for him. But I would start by saying, they told me that I'm not going to pass if I don't use the current ones, and let it ride. If he says you have to for me, or you're not going to pass for me, then maybe we'll
Well,
work
he
on
wants
that.
me to use the CSOs because when I write my lesson plans and give them to him, he wants to just be able to put them into his and then turn them in. So since I'm using different standards than the new ones, and he wants me to use the old ones so that he can just put them in and not have to go. So it's been like a struggle with this, and I'm like, I don't even understand why you're using these old ones, but okay.
Yeah, I'm going to keep my opinion much to myself, but yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know.
Okay. Well, mine use the new ones, that's it.
Yes, you need to use the new ones, the most current. The only, and I haven't forgotten your question, we'll come back to it in just a second. The only piece to task 2 that's not in this chart is the anticipated challenges, so you don't want to forget that, but there is a question regarding that. What kind of anticipated challenges do you see with your students versus the standards and objectives that you have written? So again, this is the template. You will have that chart, and then make sure that you address each of the questions that are listed, which are the same ones that are in the instructions that you have on the live text as well. I had questions on Tuesday about how much do I write, etc. I tried to say that during the orientation. I can't tell you how much to write, but when it says discuss or analyze, I don't think you can do that in a sentence or two. Okay? Some of you probably are wordier than others, so yours may be longer. But when you write your answer, you need to read it and see if it addressed everything that's in the question. And if it does, then you should be fine. Okay? So, remind me again of your question. You were asking about the standards for English.
I was asking about the pre and post tests,
Oh,
if they
pre.
have to be traditional tests or if they can be assessed in a different way.
So the pre and the post, number one, they have to be identical. All right, so whatever your pre-test looks like, your post-test looks the same. Now, does that always have to be the case? No. For you, in this situation, yes, it does. We can do different pre and post tests. Hopefully you talked about a lot of that in your assessment class. But for our purposes and what we need you to show us, you need to do the exact same pre and post test. Tell me what non-traditional pre and post you want to use.
Well, I was just doing a short story unit and I was going to have them do some type of like writing prompt at the beginning. I didn't know they had to be the exact same thing, so it kind of tears that idea
Okay.
down. So.
We've had non-traditional, like your music folks, if any of the music folks are in here, a lot of times they don't do written tests, they're doing some kind of performance. Same thing with wellness, sometimes it's a performance task or a performance assessment. But if it's going to be explaining or telling about the plot and all of that kind of stuff on a pre-test, to see if they know, then you want to use that same story and compare it and do the same thing as the post. If you want to be more general and ask, things like, what is the plot, what is the climax, things like that. And then you can compare that when they're finished, and then maybe they can add a separate piece to see if they can tell you what those things are. That would probably be okay, as long as you're still getting the same information. But if you're just going to use two separate stories, there's no way to compare necessarily that they know those terms in both stories, if that makes sense. So let's say you write your pretest, you give your pretest, and let's say that everyone in your class scores an 80% or above. What are you going to do?
Work on getting them to 100.
Okay, work on getting them to 100, but I would think that if they scored at least an 80% and better, the entire class, you should probably scrap your unit and teach something else. Or extend it. Because if they already know that material, that's a waste of your time to teach it. And you may say, oh, but I already have a plan and I had these great activities. That's good, but for another day. Maybe you can extend it, maybe you can make it more advanced. But that's what the pretest is designed to do, is to let you know what you need to teach. Maybe they just, they don't know any of it, but there are a couple questions that they scored really well, and they weren't guessing. I mean, you could tell the way you designed the question, they knew the material. Well, those are things that you don't want to include in your unit. Okay, that's why you give a pretest, to see what you need to teach. So once you give that pretest, that's going to help you determine where you go from there. That's why you need to probably go ahead and get that pretest written and given ASAP, so that if you have to redesign, so you have time. Don't write your pretest after you write your unit, okay? Because you may be rewriting a whole new unit. Yes, sir?
Do we have to attach the pretest and post-test somewhere within?
You do. So when we get, so anyway, that's task 2. Are we good on task 2? Any questions? Yes.
Yes, you said that.
Don't let me forget that question, I'll show you.
Us music people, like the test, it can actually be a performance. How would you, what format, how would we add that to the TPA?
You'll have to write it up, and I'll show you where you attach it. But if it's, letting students listen to a certain version of whatever, you're going to have to tell us that, because, you're not necessarily going to include the music, but, or the activity for PE, but you need to write it up so that we know what you did.
Okay, what if we were, same thing, I guess if we were had a performance?
Yes, you need to tell us, maybe you're going to give them a piece of sheet music and they're going to have to, off the top of their head, just play it. You're going to need to tell us that, and
Would you like to show music?
Yes,
Okay.
that would be like the pretest. So, so we'll get there in just a second. Anything else on task 2? Okay, let's look at task 3. Task 3 is your assessment plan, and those 2 questions I'm going to show you, but just make sure I don't forget. So in the template, all you're going to do is you're going to copy and paste your learning goals. So remember, in the second column of the chart we just had in task 2, you're going to copy and paste. So if you have 10 of them, you're going to copy and paste all 10 of those. This chart, I think, only goes to 3, 4. So if you need to expand it, and you can't do that because of all the little pieces inside, we can help you, Dr. Watson. Just email him and he can send you a copy to add to it. Or you can copy and paste the whole section if you want to do that. But anyway, you can expand it if you need to. So you're going to copy and paste each learning goal. And then you're going to make sure you address the pre, the post assessment, and the formative. So the pre and the post are going to be the same for each thing here. So remember when I told you to look at your pretest and mark which learning goals each question addresses? That's where this is going to go. So if on the pre-test, which is going to be the same as the post-test, but if questions 1, 3, and 5 address learning goal 1, we would like it if you would go ahead, so we don't have to flip back and forth, if you would go ahead and write out what question 1, 3, and 5 say, instead of just saying questions 1, 3, and 5. And then whatever you're doing is a formative assessment. I am not a huge, I'm not a worksheet person at all, but if that's the way you're doing some type of formative assessment or you're doing some activity or whatever that pertains to that particular learning goal, you're going to list it here. Okay? You might have more than one formative assessment. Then we get to the level of mastery. So just in general, let's say you have 4 questions and they all pertain to learning goal 1. 4 questions. What do you consider to be mastery? What are you happy with? Give me an answer.
Are you talking about percentage of the class that?
No, I'm talking about what score do you consider to be mastery? So I'm your student. You give me a test and it has 4 questions on it. What are you happy with when whatever I get? What do you consider, oh, she mastered it?
75%.
Okay, I heard 3 out of 4, heard 75%, same thing. Okay, that's fine. Now, some of you may say, oh gosh, I really think my magic cutoff is 80%. Well, if your magic cutoff is 80% on anything, then what do I need to get on that 4-question test? Not hard math here. 100. I mean, because if I get 3 out of 4, that's 75%. And, my magic number is 80%, so 75 is not going to do it. So keep those things in mind, and they may not work out mathematically, but whatever you consider to be mastery is what goes here. Okay? It does not have to be the same thing on everything, however your pre and post. I mean, if mastery on your pre is 75%, then mastery on your post will be 75% too. Okay? But whatever this activity is, you may consider this activity mastery's 90%. It doesn't have to be the same. But you need to think about this. You may only have 1 question on your pre and your post that address learning goal 1. And so you have to decide, is mastery 0 or 100%? Is there a right or a wrong mastery? No, everybody thinks differently. I mean, if you tell me 30% is mastery, I might have to argue with you a little bit, but you just need to really think, what do you consider to be mastery? And that's what goes here. All right. Any questions on that? Does that make sense?
So are you saying that, like, if, for learning goal 1, if you put level of mastery as 100%, it doesn't have to be 100% for every single one. It can be like 75% for the next one.
Right.
Correct?
Yes. Because it's going to vary. I mean, like I said, maybe my magic number is 80%. Well, if I only have 1 question, then there's not an 80%, so it's going to have to be 100. It's either 0 or 100. Or I could go to my 4-question part. It's going to have to be at least 100% because 75 is below 80, if that's what I'm thinking. Yes?
So we do this individually for each learning goal, so do we have to keep the data for all of our classes?
You do.
For each learning goal?
Yes. Now, when you said all of your classes, you're only doing your TPA unit on 1 class.
So like I would teach 4 classes.
Okay.
So all those classes is one class, and they're all the same. So are all those the ones I would see like when I group the kids together?
Yeah, I mean, in the,
Like, for example, her second period is like, they're all 10th grade social studies. So when I like second, fourth, sixth, and seventh, do I group all those kids together and track it down, or do I do it just from second period?
you, unless your supervisor is telling you something different, usually we pick one class to do the unit with. Now, you may do it with all of your classes,
Yeah.
but that's just going to be way too much to try to keep track of everything, because there's going to be some slight differences. I mean, you may not get as much covered in one class as you do the other. You know, you may want to try something different with a particular class, but the others can't do it, whatever. So I would choose one period to do the unit with for your TPA, even though you may do the same thing with every class. Okay, so you're just going to keep the, I mean, obviously you'll probably want to keep the data for all of them, but just for the TPA, you'll just keep it for that one. Yes?
When do I have to definitively decide which of those classes is the one I'm doing my TPA on?
I mean,
If I'm teaching all the same material for 3 different blocks of classes, it's all 7th grade English, when do I have to decide that's the class that all my information is going to be?
I would say sooner than later, because I'm not sure your contextual factors need to go along with that class. So those contextual factors may or may not match all classes.
I see.
So, I mean, if they're all the same and everything's the same, I'd stick them in a pack and pick one.
Okay.
I mean, you know,
Thank you.
but the sooner the better.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, yes.
So for the pre-tech, for like the pre-assessments, your level mastery is going to be lower, so like what would you recommend, the type of percentage?
Okay, now wait a minute. It's not anticipated.
Oh, it's the
Your mastery is not what you expect them to get. Your level of mastery is mastery, whatever you think is mastery. Because obviously, I think we would all think they're going to be scoring lower on the pre-test than the post-test, because we haven't taught it yet. But just because you expect them to score lower doesn't mean that's the level of mastery. I mean, when I give a pre-test, my level of mastery doesn't lower to 30%. And I'm thrilled if they get 30%. I'm not thrilled if they get 30%. I might expect it because we haven't covered it, but that's not my level of mastery. So your level of mastery here is going to be the same. They may not reach it, but hopefully by here, they will, because that's what I'm teaching them. Yes?
So I'm sort of confused on like the level of mastery. So say like I'm doing a guitar class, and if the assessment would be like a performance, you get like they're very introductory level. That pre-assessment, you know, they're learning very basic fundamentals. And then let's say the post-assessment is they play like a full song. How would you numerically put that in like the level of mastery?
Okay, so off the top of my head, I'm just guessing here. I would say maybe you're going to give them the same piece. So I'm going to give you a piece of music, and you're going to have to play the guitar and read this music. You've never seen it before. So I might have some type of a checklist rubric that would be, let's say we'll do Likert scale 5 to 1, and I'm going to assess you, while you're playing, I'm going to assess you on the tone, I'm going to assess you on the proper notes. Do you play the proper notes? I'm going to assess you on your finger, fingering with the guitar, those kinds of things. And then it may be really low because this is the first time you picked it up. I mean, the speed may be very choppy. So I'm looking at certain things. And then after I'm able to teach you, we go over it. You know, we've had our unit on playing the guitar. Then I'm going to reassess. I'm going to give you the same piece of sheet music. And now I'm going to rescore you on those same things. So I hope that your fingering is better. I hope that the speed is better. I hope that the tone is better. It sounds, you know, I can pick out what the song is that you're playing this time.
So, but like out of the number, like if we were to put a percentage in the mastery, I'm still confused on how would you assign? Like if I did that checklist and let's say I had 5 different criteria in it,
Mhm.
would I, and then like need 3 of them. So would I just put 3 to 5 or whatever out of that?
Well, for mastery, whatever you think, the actual score that they get comes in another chart. So this is just if there's 5 pieces of criteria that you're using and you consider 3 out of 5 to be mastery, then you're going to put 3 out of 5. Okay? But there's a chart in task 6 where you're going to give the actual scores that they get. Does that?
Yeah.
Okay. Questions on task 3? Yes?
So the only assessments that we were worried about tracking the task are going to be the pre-assessment and the final assessment.
No, you've got your pre and your post for each learning goal, but then you also have what else you give. I mean, there's going to be other stuff that you do.
All of our assessments for the rest.
All of your assessments that you're doing, because they're all going to relate to a learning goal, yes. Those are going to be in the formative. So you may have 5 for one and only 1 for another learning goal. Are we good here? I'm going to reiterate, please make sure that you look at the rubric so that you know what is being asked. And again, there's a narrative piece to every task, and it will ask specific questions or ask you to clarify or analyze or describe, etc.
You want to talk about pasting the assessment?
Yes, right here, as 2 of you asked, where do we put our pre and our post? Where do we put those other assessments? Right here in task 3, it says documents, and it says paste documents containing formative, summative assessment, blah, blah, blah. You're going to put them here. Now, what some people have done in the past is they'll put a clean copy of the pre, and you might say post test is the same. Some include answer keys. Bless you. It's nice to include an answer key so we kind of see where you're going with that. Some will include student copies. If you do that, please make sure that you black out their names. Some include maybe their focus student because they're going to talk about it later, so they want to include that so they can go back and say, if you look at the pre-test, focus student 1, blah, 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 focus student 2, blah, blah, blah. Any other assessments that you use, go here as well. If you give an assessment like playing the guitar, giving a sheet music, you can include the sheet music, and you want to include, because the sheet music, I've never seen sheet music that includes directions on anything, but you would include teacher directions. The teacher is going to tell the student that they have 5 minutes to practice, and then they're going to play it in front of the class, or whatever it is. If it's not on the assessment, then you want to tell us what it is that your verbal communication was with your class. And those all go here. I did have a question in the elementary group, and maybe it's more elementary than it is secondary, but if you have something going on in your class and you want to take pictures, you have some culminating activity or, I don't know, field trip or something that goes along with your unit and you want to take pictures, you can include pictures in your TPA, but what I don't want you to do is overwhelm the TPA document with pictures. If you just want to include 1 or 2 here and there, that's fine. But if you have a bunch of pictures that you want us to see, attach them, put them in a Word document, and don't upload them separately. Put them all in a Word document, and then attach that Word document to live text just to say, here's some proof of blah, blah. Okay? And that's probably more of an elementary thing than it is secondary, but maybe not. So like the art, maybe they're doing this elaborate piece of artwork and you want to share pictures with everybody.
Oh, I'm good.
Good job. We like pictures. But just don't fulfill, or, I mean, don't fill your TPA with all of that. All right, task 3, anything else? Okay, let's look at task 4. And task 4 is your design for instruction. This is where you're going to include your lesson plan. So you will see, let me talk about the focus students first. So there's a chart in the beginning. You're talking about the 2 focus students, so you need to, hopefully you know who they are already. For our purposes, they do not have to be a certain type of student. The focus students do not have to have IEPs. They can, but that's not a requirement. You just need to know why you selected them as your focus student. It may be that one's a male and one's a female, and you just pick them for whatever reason. You notice some differences. It might be that one is from the northern part of the county and the other one's from the southern part of the county. I mean, I don't know. But for some reason, you chose those 2 students. And so you're going to complete this chart on those 2 focus students. You all keep trying, you'll know who they are. We don't ever want names. But when you record data in task 6, you'll want to mark that they're focus student 1 and focus student 2. And when you refer to them throughout the document, you just refer to them as focus student 1 and focus student 2. Okay? All right, and then if you look, the template for the lesson plan unit is included. And there are 10 days, 10 lesson plans included here. So you can adjust accordingly. If your unit is only 8 days, you can delete 2 of them. Or if your unit turns out to be 14 days, you want to add 4 more. Okay? Please, please, please make sure that you highlight. That is a requirement for the highlighting. It will be sent back if there are no highlights for your lesson plan. But you can type right in, it will expand with you. I have seen and graded TPAs that left the differentiated instruction column completely blank. Don't do that. Because that's already a 1 and you're going to be doing it over. Okay? Actually, you don't want to leave anything blank. So before you submit it, make sure that you don't have any blanks in there. Because that's an automatic 1 regardless of what it is. You may say, well, I didn't give any assessments. Okay. You'll be giving assessments in your next placement to redo your TPA. You don't want to have to do that. Okay. So there should not be any blanks anywhere. But the highlighting, in case you have forgotten it, reminds you up in the little gray box of what colors you need. But you'll just put your lesson plan for your unit, just for your unit, not all those extra lessons that you're teaching, but for your unit in this piece right here. Questions? Okay, there are pieces that you have to answer to this as well. And they follow. I think there are probably about 6 or 7 of them. 7, I think. And so, there you go. You will, comment on each of those. Questions about task 4? Yes.
For the differentiated instruction section, could you possibly give like an example of the kind of stuff you prefer to see in that?
One of the questions that came up Tuesday from the group was, I know in some of our classes, we make you pretend that you have certain students in your class just to do that because you're not out in the classroom. You will be out in the classroom, so you don't have to pretend, you don't have to tell us, well, if I had a visually impaired student, this is what I would do. Use the students that you have in your class. So if you whatever accommodations you're making, put those there. So they'll be, it's going to be just dependent on what you have in your classroom, but you don't have to make up stuff that that doesn't exist. Okay. And if you say, well, I don't have anybody in my class that has an IEP, and I don't do differentiated instruction. Can you see my face? That's not good. Even if all of your students are A students, you have differentiated instruction. Yes.
If for some reason, the two classes, I've got two classes, they're guitar classes. They're smaller, so one is like 5 students, the other one is less than 10. If, for some example, that the class, basically my cooperating teacher will tell me which one he wants me to use as my focus class. Because there's not a whole lot of diversity going on in either one of those classes. Would you want me to do something along the lines of visual learners, oral learners, kinesthetic learners for differentiated instruction?
You can do that.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Okay, thank you.
Bless you. I actually think that'd be very interesting. So anything on anything that I've said so far?
I know when I'm writing lesson plans, just because of the nature of the subject I teach, music, I feel like sometimes my lesson plans are not completely the same, but like repetitive. Is that bad, good, or, use your own judgment kind of thing? So like, I'm afraid like differentiated instruction, I might put something like, hearing, like people who hear, they'll hear me clap the rhythm, they'll clap with me, and they'll get kinesthetic too. But I know that might come up in more than one lesson plan.
And that's okay. I mean, especially if your lessons are similar. And we do have, I think, we're going to have someone from the music department evaluating some of the TPAs as well. So, when there's some question and things like that, we always have somebody to ask. Other questions? So I'm not going to go over task 5, 6, and 7. I think those are so common that that's going to be our next meeting, and I'm not sure when it is, probably in a couple of weeks. But let me just mention a couple of things about task 5 in the video. You need to video as much as possible. So we always suggest video lots of lessons. Don't just video, today's the day I'm going to video and that's it. Because something's going to happen that day and you're not going to get what you want. When you go to video, when you look at task 5, there are 6 things listed that we're looking for. So make sure that you video those 6 things. You can video other stuff, but make sure we see those 6 things. The videos, you can include as many video clips as you want, up to 15 minutes. At 15:01, we stop watching. So if your best material comes at 15 minutes and 20 seconds, we're not going to see it. One of the reasons we want you to record as much as possible is so that you'll get the things that you have there. Okay, that's all I'll say on that one. I just don't want you to include videos or not get what we're asking, because if that's the piece that you get a 1 on, by the time it is graded on our part, it's going to be very difficult for you to record again, because the unit is over, and get that information in order to pass it, which means you're going to have to do it in your second placement, which could be a little harder to do, because then you've got a different unit going on and all of that. So we suggest that you record many times, and I wouldn't wait until the very end. Okay? Not to scare you, I just want you to be prepared. Yes, ma'am.
Just like on the technical side, what method do people usually use? Is like laptops or cell phones, or?
You can use anything you have or you want to use, as long as you can get it uploaded to live text. The LRC has some really good cameras that they will check out for you that you can use. I would, try to schedule that in advance. If you go in tomorrow and say, I want a camera, maybe they're all checked out. So I would check on that. But they have many cameras that they do allow students to.
And where was that?
The LRC, the Learning Resource Center, which is on the first floor, Jenkins.
Yeah, let me speak to that. You can, when she says you can use any device, that's true. What you may want to do, even at home and not in the classroom, is if you're thinking about, especially if you're thinking about using your own phone, is how good a quality video can you get of a whole room situation? Because we're used to taking selfies. It's a little different when you're looking at a big room, and make some decisions from that in terms of if you're thinking about your phone, whether that really is a good device or not. The other things that you want to think about are where you're going to set it up in the classroom, and where your students are going to be arranged compared to the camera in relation to the students who have signed their release forms to allow you to videotape. Before we dive into that, the big thing is not so much the filming, it's how you're going to get it into an editor so that you can, cut out, trim and take the 5-minute piece that you want and get rid of the 40-minute piece that you don't want. That's, you can do on a PC, you can do on a MacBook, you can do on an iPad, but you just got to be able to make sure your video files can get to whatever editor you're going to use. So if you're using a MacBook for your editing, you probably want to film it on a Mac type of device. If you're going to use a PC, then you want to use an Android or a camera or something that will work on a PC.
Is there a certain file type that the video needs to be? I know that if you take a video on your iPhone, I'm not really techie, so this might be a ridiculous question. But I took a video of a student, I had him paint with a Sphero robot, and my cooperating teacher sent it to the principal, he wanted to see it, but I took it from my iPhone, so he couldn't look at it on his computer for some reason. So do we need to convert, because it was a .mov file? I don't know. I'm not good at this stuff. So does it need to be a different type, like an MP4 or whatever that different video file type is when we upload it?
Let me answer it this way. Live text will take any file that you upload. As the only times that I'm aware that people run into problems with that type of situation is when you're working on it in the editor, the last step is always to publish it or to save it as a movie file. And so people will just hit save, and it saves it as a project. It's like a draft of your movie. It's not set up for general, everybody can look at it. It's assuming you're coming back to finish it. So depending on what programs you're using, you can email me the name of your program, and I can tell you whether it's going to be that situation, or you have to go look to make sure you have to hit publish, or you have to hit something else to make sure it puts it in a viewable file format. I'm happy to answer that question, but that's typically, just going straight from I'm filming it and I'm showing it to you, that normally doesn't give you an issue.
and I would just say this, because I was just thinking about a situation I had like last fall, is you know how we tell you to save it here, save your document here, and then save it here, and then save it here, and then save it here. I would do that maybe with my video. I would watch my video to make sure it's good before I deleted it from something. Or I had a student last fall panicking on a Sunday before it was due, Facebook Messenger, you know, I need to talk to Dr. Watson. My teacher took my video and did it on their phone, and then they sent it to me, and then the quality was bad, and they've already deleted it, so what do I do? I mean, it was one of those things, you know, so you don't want to cause yourself undue panic or stress.
Yeah, experiment at home first.
Yeah.
Just go home tonight, if you're thinking about using one of your own devices, and make sure that in the living room or whatever your biggest room is, it's going to give you good lighting and you can see what's going on. I mean, that's the first step. And if it doesn't, then you might need to go to the LRC and check out an iPad or a camera or borrow a friend's device.
And I would also strongly encourage you to watch it the same day you film it. And don't wait till the end of your unit to film, because if you do it early in the unit and you can't hear it or can't see or whatever, it doesn't work, then you got time to redo it. But I've had students who film it and don't watch it until 2 weeks later, and it's not even good, and then they're stuck. They have to start all over.
Yes, I was going to mention that because, and you want to make sure that you've covered all of those pieces that we asked you to, because if not, maybe you thought you did, maybe somebody else was recording, they turned it off early, whatever. And a lot of those things we'll mention again next week or whenever we meet again, when we talk about 5. But I know Dr. Watson did mention the consent, so let me just mention that to you. You have to get those consent release forms. All we ask you to do is save and you have to use the one that's attached to live text. It's just a state requirement that we have to follow. So get those from all of your students, and you can scan those into one document, just like I told you could do the pictures, or take pictures and put them into a Word document, but do not send those to Mrs. Priest, do not send those to any of us. Scan them, put them in a file, and upload it. We will be looking for that on your live text account as well. Don't put them in the document or in the template for the TPA, but put them in a separate file. Yes?
Where in my text are we supposed to?
You have a list of documents. Yeah, Dr. Watson?
I can't.
Okay.
I'd have to go out.
Okay, and the internet access in here is really sketchy, so you can't get it. But when you go to your live text account, you have where you see the directions to the template, where the template is, all of that, one of them says consent release form.
Great, okay, as
Yeah.
long as it's easily labeled.
Yeah.
There's a list of all kinds of files, like templates and how-to things.
Right.
Great.
So, and the only other thing I want to mention is if you have students whose parents or guardians did not release, is that what you're going to ask? I'm going to give you my personal opinion. You probably need to talk to the teacher and all that, but when I have my students video for their math methods course, I do not allow them to let the students leave the room, because that may be the only time they get that instruction. But you can set the camera up, like if Johnny turns in his and his parents for whatever reason, and it's not, I'm not mad that he can't be on video. I just need to know. I'm going to put him in a group right here. I'm not going to sit him in the corner. I'm not going to sit him out in the hall. He's still going to participate. I'm going to put him right here in this group, and my camera view is going to be right here. So he's not ever going to be in the camera unless he gets up and walks across the room or something. He may test me on that. I'm not sure. But for the most part, he's not going to be on there. He's still part of my class. I'm still, walking over there and checking on him and his group. He probably doesn't even realize that the camera's not even facing him. But don't exclude, don't make a big deal about it. We don't know why parents, for whatever reason, I mean, it could be nothing, they just don't want it on camera. Or maybe they just didn't want to turn in the slip. But do everything you can to get all of those slips turned back in. But don't exclude any child who would not be given permission to be on video.
Please don't, because then the principal and everybody falls in. That's the whole thing, so.
Other questions? Yes.
Say for example, at the beginning of the year in school, they turned in a release form about media that said my child cannot be videoed, but then you give them this one and they said they can be videoed. What do you do?
I mean, my guess would be they can video for your class. I'm not sure why, unless the parent just,
For most recent documents signed.
and it's for this specific event, I would go ahead. If I thought there was an issue, I mean, you might talk to the teacher and say, oh my gosh, I think they just didn't read it and they just signed it, or
Yeah.
somebody else signed it. Then again, I'd stick Sally over here at this table with Johnny, and I just wouldn't record. It's not, I just wouldn't take any chances.
Okay.
Other questions? Yes.
Where did you say the 6 items that we have to have on video are listed?
They're in task 6, or 5, and we'll talk about that next time, but in task 5, it lists.
I got it on the screen.
Oh, okay. Oh, there they are, right here. And someone did ask, well, how can you see? The first one says organize the classroom. Well, you know, if you're videoing and you're running around going, oh, I forgot where the crayons are. And, oh, you all were supposed to have rulers and protractors, but they're in that closet over there. Give me just a second, I gotta go get that. And, oh, I was supposed to have that video ready to go. Give me 5 minutes, let me get the video. The computer doesn't turn on. Okay, right there, you've already shown lots of examples how your classroom was not organized. Resources, make sure if you are listing any resources or using any resources that you need to reference, put them at the end of each task. Don't put them all at the end or all at the beginning, just put them at the end of each task. And I think it tells you to use APA, well, not I think, it does tell you to use APA style.
Sorry, also our work citation at the end of each section.
Pardon?
Our work citation at the end of each section.
Yes, at the end of each section. Other questions? No? All right, that's it. I will see you, I don't know, Mrs. Priest, do you need them? Okay, I will see you in a couple of weeks and we'll finish, oh, supervisors?
Yeah, I think,
Okay.
if you have time, Mr. Woodward or Mr. Messinger, just get with them, otherwise, you're free to go.
If there's MAT post-vaccine,
Yeah.
I'd like to stand. I can see two. I don't know if they do